It was what? Homeless Battle Royale, something like that.
Make sure if you ever put that on a computer, make sure you disconnect from the internet. You do everything because that thing about to make you homeless. He's like, oh, you want to play a homeless Battle Royale? Let me show you how it's done. Yeah. Go straight to the streets. You're finna be fighting for your survival. Hey, everybody. Welcome to another episode of Super Agile Bros. You already know what it is. It's your boy, Bradston, on the mic as per usual. And, of course, we have the boy, Kyle, with us. Kyle, tell the people, hey.
What's going on, everybody?
So, today's a little bit sad, because our boy, Steve, Glasses Steve, Four-Eyed Steve, Steve-a-do, you know, our boy.
It's tragic.
He's not here with us. He's okay. He's fine. He's good. He's healthy, but he's unable to join us today. I think he's on the road traveling for Thanksgiving. So, you know, safe travels to our brother, our Super Agile Bro. But he's sorely missed. So we're gonna have to do things a little bit different today. You know, the parents are out of the house, and you know, the kids are running the show. So we're gonna have a good time. So today
I just caught on to what you were saying.
Yeah, you caught it. Today we're gonna talk a little bit about something that me and Kyle are, I would say, pretty experienced in. Something that we've been doing for a long time. Something that we both are very passionate about, and something that we feel it might be a good time to talk about. It's game development, but particularly we're going to be talking a little bit about the game development world. Also, kind of a little bit about, you know, game journalism. We're talking about the game development industry as a whole, but kind of some of the things that we've experienced and noticed and learned on our journey. So I think it's going to be a really interesting talk because even before this, like, we had ideas of what we were going to do today for the podcast, and then me and Kyle were talking about something, and I was like, "Yo, Kyle, we got to talk about this on the podcast," because it was that good. So I guess I'll kick it off to Kyle off the jump here, off the to start it off. So kind of where this conversation started with is Kyle. We were talking today, and he asked me if I had seen, I guess, something, one of a popular YouTuber's recent video, who goes by the name of GMTK, or Game Maker's Toolkit, and he was asking me how I felt about it, but I was like, I haven't really seen it. And then I was like, well, why are you bringing it up? So Kyle, kind of give the rundown of, you know, what you've been feeling about GMTK. You know, you can give a rundown what the channel is, what's been happening, your feelings. I'm gonna hand it off to you, and then, you know, we will discuss. So yeah,
for sure. So yeah, Game Maker's Toolkit. He's been on YouTube for a couple years. It's a guy I've been following for quite some time. He's a games journalist. But what made him unique, you know, is that he would do like breakdowns and analyses of game mechanics, not just reviewing certain games. And so that's what made it so cool to watch his videos. They were a lot of times very insightful. You know, he'd break down AI and level design and all these different things, like some really high, seemingly like high level concepts and knowledge, you know, of what made games tick, you know, what differentiated good games from mediocre games, and mediocre games from just bad games, you know, why some games failed, games that were ahead of their time, all those different things he kind of just always touched on. But recently he's kind of moved away from that typical, if you want to, you know, format of videos, you know, he's started a game development journey of his own, which at first was pretty interesting because, you know, we've done a couple of game jams that he's hosted.
Yeah.
And so, you know, we've created games in a week or 3 days, I think, to, you know, contribute. And he'd play he'd play the submitted games. He wouldn't play our games.
Our game, yeah.
Yeah. You know, people who paid him for a top slot. But anyway, he so that was pretty fun. And then, you know, during those times, you know, we get his insights on quickly made games and like see what he would say off the cuff, and that was pretty cool. And all this time, you know, it would seem like he was super knowledgeable about making games. So for him to come out with a series saying, hey, this is going to be the first game that I like truly make, you know, I'm going to be learning how to use Unity, and I don't remember if he said he was going to make the art assets, but at least he was going to, you know, take a game development journey and chronicle it for everybody to see. And so on the surface, it seemed really cool, you know, because, you know, it was somebody that I would think a lot of people look up to in the game, just the indie game world, if not the, you know, game development world as a whole, just because his journals, or I guess summaries and, you know, topics that he's covered have been pretty prolific, if that's the right word. Like I've taken a lot of solace in a lot of stuff he says he's been saying. Have you watched any of his older videos?
So yeah, I think I was saying this to you earlier today that like I was like vaguely familiar with Game Maker's Toolkit and like what it was back in the day. Like I don't even know when I got introduced to it, but you know, for me it's because I'm pretty into game development. Like I think I've mentioned in episodes before, GDC or the Game Developers Conference. So I'm always looking for videos where game developers are talking about techniques and things that they've learned. And even if it's not necessarily something that I do particularly, I think there's something to learn. So I think in the midst of going through videos, like game development videos, game GDC talks, I think I stumbled on his videos, but I think I maybe just kind of glossed over them because they were different, you know, like GDC talks are kind of like a person standing at a podium talking about a game they developed or something they learned. His were more like I guess you could say a bird's eye view. So yeah, I never really knew much about him until like we started doing the game jams. So yeah.
Yeah, that was definitely when we started to learn, I guess, even more about him because, throughout the game jams, you know, he was, first off, the game jams that he was hosting, you know, they were the biggest ones on Itch, sure. the platform, like tons, like tens of thousands of entries, which were setting records every time. And, I've also heard a lot of people reference his videos and stuff too.
Yeah, and you stumbled upon the GMTK jam, right? Like, because I feel like you were like, hey, do you want to try this out or something like that? Like, I was like, oh, sure, I guess. Yeah.
Yeah, because he did one. I think the last one we were in was his third one, if I'm not mistaken. And so, yeah, I spectated the first one. And then when I saw the entries, they were accepting entries for the second one. And I was like, you know, maybe this could be a way for us to get back into game development. Because at that time, we hadn't really made any projects together in a while.
Yeah.
And it's kind of kicked us back into gear a little bit. You know, made a couple of projects since then. But we were talking a little bit about it earlier. And I guess the interesting thing was, you know, the transition from that is because in doing the game jams and seeing his reviews and stuff, you know, he came across as like this really knowledgeable guy. And during the game jams, he'd be playing some games and he'd be kind of critical, you know, on some of these games, you know, and it seemed like it was coming from a place of experience. But then, you know, what we were talking about earlier is that his new videos about his game dev journey have been revealing like just how little he actually knows about the fundamentals of game development, which on one hand is kind of sobering because it's like, you know, cool. We're seeing somebody, you know, their true experience with learning game development from the ground up. But then on the other hand, it's like, wait a minute, is this the same guy who did this 30-minute video about artificial intelligence in games?
Yeah, and then I think for me, like, since I didn't know much about him, I did note, like, during his streams, especially when he was playing other people's games, you know, like, like, one thing about game jams, if you're not familiar with them, essentially, like, what it is like, you can, like, it's basically like a hackathon or, like, basically a whole bunch of people come together in a short period of time and they create a game, right? And your teams can vary in size, people vary in skill level. It could be a 1-person team, it could be a 10-person team, it could be somebody who's been doing it for literally their first time making a game to somebody who's been doing it for like a decade or something like that. And so there's a big like skill gap a lot of times. And the thing that kind of like made me feel a little weird, I think, about his thought process was just that he would mention during the games like, oh, this game is kind of weak, like not good, but I've never made a game before, so I appreciate your effort, and it takes a lot. And so I was like, wait, this guy hasn't made a game before? Like
yeah.
he speaks as an authority. Like I didn't expect him to have made like, Skyrim.
Right.
Skyrim. But but even to dabble, I think is important. Even as a hobbyist, you kind of get a real understanding of the difficulties of game development. You get an understanding of things to consider. So it kind of was off-putting, and I kind of was like, then why are you judging me? That's kind of how I felt. But I said, you know what? And I was saying this to Kyle earlier. You know what? Like, there's people who have never practiced law or criminal law or something, but they're experts in their field because of study and understanding of history and case law and blah, 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 blah. So I said, you know what? Like, I'm going to just let it pass. But like, and then there's other stuff, and maybe we'll talk about later, like that made me like kind of be like, okay, this is a little suspect, like how games were getting chosen to be played and like stuff like that made me feel a little weird. But anywho, to hear that he's doing his own game development journey was definitely interesting to hear. So sorry, continue, Kyle. I had to say that because
yeah, thanks for bringing that up, because that's a good point, because that's kind of like, I guess, where like you articulated where my thought process is better than I could, because it's like, how do you it's like the saying, don't meet your heroes type of thing, because he's like unfolding right before my very eyes. He's showing that he's just a regular guy who doesn't really know anything about game development. And, after watching his video, hours and hours of his content, it's like, I'm struggling with the credibility, like who were his sources? It's like he's not the one with the knowledge anymore. That's like what I'm struggling with,
Yeah. Yeah. And it's like, not that he shouldn't be allowed to have an opinion, right?
Right.
Like, or that he shouldn't, just because you don't know everything doesn't mean that you shouldn't have, some insight. But like, to think that like you have never even tried, like the way that he's described. Well, no, he said that he's maybe tried it. I don't know. The way he's been saying it is kind of confusing to me, but it just seemed like wait, like you have these deep in depth, like you said, something like AI, like, not to say that I'm an artificial intelligence development master, but I've watched GDC talks. I've worked in AI. I've, worked in AI outside of even game development. So I kind of have an understanding of the principles, what to consider, pathfinding, logic, weighted randomness, whatever these kind of things. They're not theories to me. They're like practical things that you have to consider and how they are implemented in games. And to hear that somebody has this deep, oh, this is bad, this is good in a game, but like honestly couldn't tell you even an approach. He could just from the outside of the world, like, oh, like you're an art critic, but you've never painted before. Like, you don't know what a stroke is. You don't know what blah, 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 like.
And that's kind of the breakdown that I'm feeling now as I watch his videos. Like, I'm trying not to be critical towards the guy, because I understand, but it's like, the more I watch them, the more I see him fall into pitfalls and traps that early and young and new game developers fall into, and I'm struggling to realize, I guess, see the difference between, is he just making the content, is he playing up a scenario for his viewers? Because it seems like he's genuinely struggling with stuff that he's kind of called out in a lot of his other videos, like having a focused type of, gameplay, like during the game jams, like if a game didn't seem focused, or if there was too many elements, or if there wasn't a hook, all these things that seems to be like where he's getting caught up in, like the scope creep and getting lost in the genres of his game versus the gameplay, like, and he mentions, like, he kind of goes back and forth, like this internal struggle between the knowledge that he's gathered over the last couple years versus the genuineness of him never making a game before. And it's like he's having to come to grips with all the claims he's made from the outside looking in, that game development is more or less one note. And like, he's suffering from all the gray areas now. And, it's kind of an interesting thing to see. And I'm kind of surprised because, for somebody who has the knowledge that he has, I would think, that it would be more hidden throughout this journey. And so that's why I'm trying to think of it from the guys as maybe he's intentionally playing these things up for his viewers. Because when I read through the comments, they're saying, oh, these lessons you're going through are really helping me. Like I'm really seeing the stuff you're struggling with, and it's making a lot of sense. But I'm having trouble like disconnecting that from, an authority on the subject matter shouldn't be struggling with these type of things.
Yeah, and it begs the question, and I think you asked this a little bit, or said this a little bit earlier when we were talking the first time, when we first started the conversation, was like who's his audience, right?
Yeah.
Like, because, at first when you see somebody speaking and has a large audience of people, you think to yourself, okay, well, these people must see him as an authority, right? And they must think that he's knowledgeable or understanding of these techniques and blah, blah, blah. And the more that, the thing that you mentioned before, I think was like, oh, a lot of these people have probably never made a game or even have tried to really make a game or have gotten very far, because I think that's maybe why his content, even the little content that I've seen, never resonated with me. Because I think, especially me being like a person who watches GDC talks for fun, like, like I'm watching, like today I shared a video about like pixel art with Kyle, and I'm not an artist or a designer, but to me, it's interesting to hear the techniques that somebody's implementing into a game development, world, because I'm like, okay, that's interesting, because me being aware of this will help me when I work with Kyle, and, like, how does he approach this and what I need to be thinking about, blah, blah, blah. So for me, it's like a little bit educational, but it's like interesting and fun. And, seeing some of these topics he covers, like, oh, this is like a pretty, like, there's whole GDC, like, master classes on this stuff where people are like, I don't even know what the right answer is. Like I just watched a GDC talk where like a game designer was talking about how the wrong question to ask somebody is, how is a game fun? How do you make something fun? And not that I don't know if GMTK has ever tackled this, but I wonder if that might be the approach that he sees it as. Like, because fun is not the answer. Like, if somebody says, oh, I want to make a fun game, that's wrong. It's like, you want to make a game that like either engages the user, is something that connects with them, creates a new approach at like, you have to think about it on a different wavelength, because fun is absolutely, like, some people don't have fun going to the amusement park, and other people do. So
it's subjective, and then like that's one siloed way to kind of classify an experience, because maybe to somebody, it's enjoyable, quote unquote, but not necessarily what you'd consider to be fun, like relaxing isn't fun necessarily, but it's enjoyable. And some people play games to relax, not to have fun
per se.
Yeah. So the distinction does exist.
Yeah, and it just begs the question of like, there's a lot of ways we could go with this conversation, but it's like, the emperor has no clothes.
Yeah.
Like, I will probably participate in another GMTK jam just because I think it's a good lesson. I like learning. I like taking a challenge. I like challenging myself, and I enjoy working with Kyle. That we work a lot on games. And also I think that if you were to say be successful in a GMTK jam, it does give you a little bit of exposure. If your game actually gets played, if you, consider, if you don't pay anybody. But anyway, sorry, I'm just making shots. But anyway, but like, I think for me, like, not that I had a lot of, I think I said this to Kyle earlier, but like, I don't really have respect for anybody. Like, I don't necessarily look at a person just because they're in a particular position or doing a particular thing that person deserves my respect in that field, right? I think they deserve respect as a human being. Like, I will never talk down to them. I'll never call them out of their name. They deserve that respect, but that doesn't mean that I should, respect them as a subject matter expert or somebody who knows what they're talking about. So fundamentally, when I look at GMTK's channel content, I don't, that's how I look at him. But I think the respect that I started to gain is pretty much diminished.
Yeah.
And it sounds like it's like that for you too, Kyle, from what you've been saying.
Yeah, to a degree, I would say, because his videos very well produced. He's a great writer, a great journalist, but a lot of them have come across as more of an authority versus, a journalistic opinion. Or high concepts. It's like, this is what you do to make your game good. And whether or not that was the intent, I don't know. But, that was just how they were coming across. And so it set this expectancy, at least for me, that even though he hadn't made a game, maybe he hadn't made very many games, when he gets on the journey to make his own game, he'd at least abide by those concepts that he was an authority for. Because the thing you mentioned a few minutes ago about, asking how to make a game fun is kind of the straw that broke the camel's back for me as far as watching these videos. Because I've been legitimately watching them thinking that I could learn something. And, since he's such a great writer and he does do a lot of research, there are tidbits of knowledge in there. But I think the unfortunate part is that when he's real and visceral, his lack of knowledge kind of shows. And so one thing he said, it was pretty early in the video, like maybe 5 minutes in. And so first off, I was avoiding the video already because the last video put me off. And I was like, I can't watch any more of these. And so it showed up, it auto played after after the video you sent me. You trapped me because you sent me that about the low poly art, the GDC talk. And so it auto-played his video afterwards because it was in the background. I was listening to it. And I was like, you know what? I'll give it a chance. And so he did his, his opener, his premise. And then he was talking about one of the videos he made a couple years ago or before. I don't know how long ago it was. But it was about level design and puzzle design. And he said that he approached those people and asked them, how do you make... What was the question? How do you make puzzles fun? Or something like that. Like, how do you make a puzzle?
How do you make a puzzle? Yeah, that's, I think, what you said to me earlier. Yeah.
Yeah. And I was like, what kind of question is that? Like, it was like out of the void, you ask somebody, how do you make a puzzle? And he said that their response was, they just gave him a slow shrug. It's like, how do you begin to answer that? Because and then what really, I guess, disappointed me was, shoot your shot. I get that. But he said his reaction was disappointment. Like, he was disappointed that they didn't give him a simple, easy answer and a formula that he could go by and just go plug into his game. And I was like, oh, that is, what a perspective to have going into this, that you're looking for easy routes already, And so it really just kind of solidified, I guess, where his head is at, because I remember first couple games that I made, that was my go-to. And if you ever played one of those crappy games on your iPhone or something, it's easy that you can easily tell that that's what their intent was too. what's the path of least resistance for me to make an interactive game that I could just shovel out.
Yeah. And I think that's kind of so I want to say this because it's just a real talk thing. So number one, like, we the Super Agile Bros, we positive people, and we try to keep it that way. But I think one thing that I think is important to note is that, like, positivity and truth can be together, right? We're speaking truth from our perspective. Once again, this is our opinions, but like, when we're looking at somebody, especially for something we care dearly about, like, which is game development, like, this is like, if there's a field that I think Kyle or myself could decide to be in that would be sustainable financially, emotionally, all that, like, it would probably be game development over anything else. So, like, we take it, not that it's sacred, it's not, like that, but it's like, we have a certain amount of respect for the art, respect for the creative process, and we have been in it. So for us, like, we take it from a very critical point. If somebody's going to speak as an authority figure, like you said earlier, Kyle, it's one thing to say, like, hey, this is my opinion, this is how I feel about it. But to say a game is fun or AI is good if, like, it's different than, saying, like, in my opinion, I think things that can make games fun are this. In my opinion, like, it definitely feels more authoritative. And just, I think one thing that's really cool about GMTK is, like, his voice and his cadence. Definitely.
Oh, yeah.
Like, there's no way you don't
fall asleep to that stuff.
Exactly. Like, there's something about it where you're like, yeah, I trust you. And, I think, like you said, Kyle, like, when you first start game development, for those who may be interested in game development as a career, or just somebody who just likes playing games, like, you realize early in the process that pretty much everything that you thought about game development is probably kind of wrong.
Yeah.
Unless you've done a thorough amount of research and listened to a lot of GDC talks. And even if you have listened to a lot of talks, it's very different from practically sitting down and trying to create a new idea or even implement an idea that already exists.
Right.
Like, it's still difficult to make it quote unquote fun or entertaining or interesting. And yeah, like, I think it's kind of like walking up to a millionaire and then going, like, the question he asked to those, like, puzzle designers or game designers, like, how do you get rich?
Mm-hmm.
Like, bro,
where's the money at?
How do I get this money? It's like, well, like, check this out, man. Like, there's plenty of ways to get money. It's just like, what are you good at? What are you a better question is like, hey, I've been starting my business and I've been struggling with this and I'm trying to figure out, how do I get more customers? Right? Like, that's an informed question. If I go to a puzzle designer and I'm asking him a question about puzzles, I'm going to say, hey, one thing that me and Kyle have been working on is how to make an interesting puzzle with this type of motif. We're trying to make it easy to understand, high readability, but, like, with some challenge. Like, how do you go about approaching, making something accessible pretty early, the puzzle accessible, but adding challenge as the player gets deeper, and, like, something like that shows that, like, oh, like, I'm like, what? Like, how do you make a puzzle?
Right. Like, you gotta give them something to work with so they can see at least where your level is. Cause that's a hugely open-ended question, because, going back to the millionaire example, they could tell you, oh, well, you need to invest in real estate. You need to go buy some stocks. You need to go work at McDonald's and work your way all the way up to manager and then own a McDonald's 25 years in the future. All these, they'll all get you to money, but it's just like, because your question is so non-specific. And so, yeah, to puzzle design, if you don't even tell them what genre that you're attempting to make your game or like, how does the player move? What do they interact with? Is it a card game? Is it a 3D game? Is it VR? Where is it even happening? Does any part of it exist? And so it's just like, they have to formulate the rules of the puzzle, because that's what really makes a puzzle work, are the compounding rules. If you don't even give them that, then they could give you something that'd be useless to you too. Like, you're not helping anybody by asking such an open-ended question.
Yeah. And I think one thing that I respect. I was just watching a video like not too long before we started recording about some like YouTubers and like how they rose and they fell, right? Like I'm like, okay, interesting. And one thing that I've noted is that a lot of the YouTubers, no matter what type of content they were doing, how they rose and fell is them how they started their journey. Like how they became successful. If they became successful genuinely, like, hey, this is who I am, this is what I do, blah, 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 blah. Like, shout out to the boy Corey Kenshin, shout out to the boys Omni, shout out to, like these people who are just being themselves, like they resonate for a long time because
Game theorist.
Game theorist. Oh man, he's the OG of being himself. I appreciate the game theorist. Like these guys and gals, they really come out the gate as themselves. But the other side is the YouTuber that comes out with like a facade, the Foozy Tubes and the, I don't know a lot of YouTubers, but I know him. He fell off hard. Like they kind of like have a gimmick and then it's hard to carry that gimmick on. And I feel like GMTK might have run into that same existential crisis where like he enjoys the journalism aspect of talking about games. And then he was like, like this isn't something I'm enjoying anymore. I've been doing this for years and I want to do something different. But the problem is like your content was always like based on like a premise that you're an expert. So to all of a sudden appear on camera, because first of all, like I don't know if anybody knew what he looked like. He appears on camera, so like he gets rid of that mystery, which is what it is. A lot of people say that's a bad idea. Like so, he humanizes himself, and then in that humanization, he goes, "Also, I don't know anything." Like so all of a sudden, like you just go, "Oh, you're the Wizard of Oz." Like you are just here doing stuff and have no and like, I think I appreciate the honesty. I do. But I feel like maybe that should have came earlier, or he could have taken the honesty and kind of been like, hey, so what I'm going to do is make a game, but I'm going to talk about specific aspects of the game and how I'm building them and applying the principles that I talked about with you guys earlier in this way. No, I've never made a game. I don't have that skill set programming. Okay, cool. That's fine. But I'm going to show you how you can approach making a game that's going to be fun. But what's funny? Making that claim means that you have to be confident that you can make a fun game. But if if you don't know what you're talking about, you probably don't want to speak that confidently.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. And that's kind of been like all of that kind of encompasses, I guess, the last couple of episodes, like how they've come across to me. Like the human side of it is, like you said, it's appreciated, but then I guess it's impossible for me to remove who he is on camera now in comparison to who he was behind the camera when he was just the voice.
Yeah.
Because if I knew that he was just speaking candidly about these different like the stuff he's running into and really just trying to pass it off as these are things you need to look out for when you're developing your game. And I feel like he's the type of writer, journalist or whatever, just compared to his other work, that could have easily created a narrative around this journey, But what scares me, I say scares me, but his first couple of videos so far, in my opinion, have holistically, just like from his little rants and stuff, they've been real. But because of that sense of authority, they've also kind of been damaging to people who may want to start a game to think that, having these internal struggles, a lot of times he shows a way out, but he like has them on camera, kind of like this last one. He rants on and on about the difference between his game is struggling. He's struggling to figure out if his game is a puzzle game or a platformer game.
Mm.
And the thing about it is, he's still in the early development phases. Like, the game hardly exists.
Yeah.
And so he's trying to make this decision, but then out of the other side of his mouth saying, well, maybe I should just let the game tell me what it wants to be. But at the same time, the whole video, he's not making progress, and he's going back and forth, creating these different levels and trying to like force one of these aspects to fit,
Yeah.
And he goes puzzle, platformer. And then I thought it was a bit. I thought he would eventually land, you know what? Puzzle platformers exist. Why don't I just make it both? But he stuck to his guns and said it could only be one. And I was like, whoa, that's one of the strongest ways to stunt any sort of innovation when it comes to these games. And it contradicts a lot of the things, or pretty much all of the GMTK game jams we've had have been the combination of two or more genres in an effort to make something new. And so, like, to see that in his own journey, he hasn't referenced his own advice, but is like put himself into a box is just kind of odd, and it seems like it's visceral. It seems like he's legitimately ignorant to having both genres be okay to make a game, to make his first game.
Yeah, like it's like, man, there's so much I can say about that. It's like, game development 101, like, it's all, you go gameplay first, right? The Nintendo method, right? You try to make the game fun and then you try to build on it. But like, one thing that you learn and you hear from a lot of game developers, like, if an idea isn't working, you got to get rid of it, like, and move on. Like, like to be attached to this idea, like, can it be a puzzle or a platformer? It's like, yeah, the game can kind of tell you what it's going to be. And I think that's a part of it, like, from playing it and understanding it and kind of finding, what makes it like tick. But it's like, it's almost like there's a reason that games take 2-3 years to make, right? Because like, just like when a writer writes a book and they get writer's block, like sometimes you're just developing, like sometimes like, me and Kyle will be sitting down and we just got like ideas on ideas, bars on bars, like,
yeah.
Okay, boom, let's do this. Boom, let's do this. Boom, let's do this. And then like we implement all these things and we're like, okay, now what do we do with this? Like, how are we feeling? And at that point it's like, okay, let's try this. No, that doesn't feel right. This feels better. Ooh, if we did that, it's like, you're kind of like massaging out the thing that really makes your game tick,
Right.
And I dare say in many ways, and it's hard because I feel like in order to be an expert in something, you kind of have to die on some type of hill. But I dare say, like, there's very few people, unless you're like a really seasoned vet, who can say like, I know what makes a game great. Because how many studios have made great games and bad games? It's like,
right.
It happens, and there's a lot of reasons for that. And I feel like you can't, I don't know, there's some hubris in here, like, to think that, like, my interest is, how long will this go on? Like, how long, when will he quit? like what's, because it's like we've made plenty of games, but we've also like hung up a lot of games. And rarely the first game you make is going to be the best game. That happened with the Stardew Valley guy. Like, he's 1 in a billion. So it's like, what's the likelihood that the game that he makes is going to be even interesting?
Right.
And playable,
Right. Yeah. Because going back to the Stardew Valley guy, I think even in times like that, because that game was in development for 10 years, something like that?
Something crazy.
I would wager that within that 10 years, the game was made, 3, 4, 5, 6 times over until, he landed through the trials of making those other versions. He landed somewhere where Stardew Valley is now.
Yeah.
Because, I think it's just unreasonable to think that the very first game you make is going to be, like, it could be novel, but to be on the level of Stardew Valley, there had to be you had to go through something, man. Like,
yeah. Deep darkness makes a game like that.
Right. And so, like, I might be wrong, but I could have sworn, I can't remember his name. Is it Mark, the Game Maker's Toolkit guy? Mm-hmm. I could have sworn that his whole, goal for this endeavor wasn't to make the next hit indie game. And, because of the following he has, there's a chance that even if he put it on Steam and sold it for $1 and it was garbage, that he would still make. Yeah, just because he has, the loyal fans, and he's been an authority up to this point. But, it seemed like it was just to be kind of an experiment, because he said he hadn't made a game. He wanted to make a game. And it's over the process, it seems like it's becoming something that's much larger. Like he's feeling like this intense weight for it to be good. Yeah. One of the things, because I've felt what he was talking about today, because there are nuggets, there are really good nuggets in here, in his videos still. But he was talking about he's making a concept version or a demo version, and he wanted to put 5 levels in it. And he said that he woke up in the middle of the night, going back against all of his thoughts and thinking it's not good enough to share yet and stuff like that, And it's like, are you wanting to publish this game? Yeah. Are you losing sight of what your goal was, which was just to make a game? And part of me thinks there might be too many eyes on it.
Yeah. The expectations. Yeah. Like, what does it even mean? I want to make a game. Like not to be rude, but like, what does that mean? Like, I think for myself, when I say like, oh yeah, I want to make a game, to me, it's like, I have an interesting idea or a concept and I want to follow it through to see like if it can become something. So like, yeah, like my goal isn't to release 85% of what I create, or even 95%. Most of the time it's just, I want to see if I can, like, recently I made, like, before Among Us and all those games came out, I made kind of a what do you call it? A mafia type game. Like, just in my free time. Yeah, like,
Man, that could have been you.
Yeah, but once again, like, my goal wasn't necessary. Like, my goal was like, oh, I want to make something fun, like something, like a multiplayer game, blah, blah, blah. So it was me dabbling, but really that was just a lesson teaching me more about all the things that I know now, and how to approach things. And, like, I think, yeah, like you said, there's a lot of pressure on him, and I best of luck to him. I think honestly, I also think it's like one of those things where he's falling into the early game developer trap of, what's it called? Scope creep.
Yeah.
Where you're like, oh, like, I want to make a game. I want to make it this big. Mm-hmm. I want to make it this big. And then, like, maybe you narrow it down because you realize, oh, I don't have the skills or that. Well, I'll make it this big. But you still don't really understand what that takes. You know what I'm saying? Like, what does it take to make 5 levels?
5
like,
levels, yeah.
The hardest thing is, to be anybody out there who's aspiring to be a game developer, the hardest thing isn't making the gameplay. Sometimes it's making those interconnected pieces, making the menus, making sure that when you load out of a level and you load into another, everything is situated, making sure that it's consistent. Like, those little pieces are sometimes the most difficult things.
Easily.
Easily.
And it's funny you mentioned scope creep, because I wanted to watch the entire video before I talked about it. And, the first 16 minutes was, him in this cycle of how do I make the game better? What type of game is it? All these, really conceptual things that people tend to get stuck on. And he actually did transition and say, a lot of this stuff does tie into scope creep, where you have an idea. And it builds another idea, idea. But it reminded me of, like, you ever see those movies, or even in games, where they're like, oh, I hate when a game has a minecart level. Yeah. And then the next level is a minecart
level.
And it's just as bad as the games that they were making fun of.
Mocking.
Like, that's what it felt like, because it was like for the first 16 minutes, he was like, man, you know, this game needs to be bigger, needs to be better. And then he's like, all that scope creep. And, you know, he had an interview with a guy who worked on another game, and, you know, which I thought was good. And he just showed the guy talking. And what the guy said was, you know, stuff like this, you know, it's very easy to overwhelm yourself, because you're in the thick of it. You want it to be the best it can be. You have all these ideas. You want to make them all right now. But he's like, give yourself some arbitrary timeline to do stuff in and see what you can do in that timeline. And so, like, that was probably the best part of the video, in my opinion, because the whole first half of him deliberating, I get it. You know, you want to show that to your viewers to some degree, or at least acknowledge it. But it felt overloaded, and I feel like a lot of people at the 15-minute mark would have zoned out and only got the negative side and not gotten at the very end where the guy was like, you need to reset, because if you continue like this, you're going to burn yourself out, or you're never going to finish the game. And it was like at the end of the video, the guy talked for like 2 minutes, and I was like, that is the meat of what's going on. Like, that's, and so then I was a little bit discouraged again, because he was like, I'm going to give myself 30 days to make 5 levels.
Oof. Yeah.
And he tried to soften the blow by saying, you know, it's not going to be 30 consecutive and holidays, other videos and stuff. But I was like, it sounds exactly the same as what you've been doing. Like, you know, you've been working on the game when you can around other things to make it bigger and bigger. It's like,
good luck with that. You know, it's interesting that the I don't know how long the video was, but it sounds like the piece of content that was actually truly informative was the piece of content that came from a person who actually does this.
Yes.
You know, like, it doesn't even matter what scale they do it at, indie level or AAA, like somebody who actually cut their teeth in it, you know, making money or not. Like, it's just, you can't explain to somebody how much the experience of making a game really matters. You know, I think one of our, you know, we talk about it all the time, but one of our games, Amber, like, was so informative for both of us. Like, we had both been making games. You know, I had released 3 games at that point before Amber. And, you know, like, they each had their own, they're all different in their own way. So long story short is, we get to this idea, we're starting to make Amber, and we got so many ideas. And I think eventually we were just like, you know what, we just need to choose a date that we're going to release this boy. You know, like, we got so much to do. Like, this game could be so much greater. Like, we could have 5 different zones. Like, we had drawn out, like, you had drawn out like this map, and we were like thinking it through, and we were like, you know what, like, let's do basically what we called the alpha, the pre-alpha.
Pre-alpha.
But, you know, that was so, like, that's probably one of my favorite experiences developing a game, because even though like the last weeks, like the last week was like tough, like, because all of the things that I mentioned earlier, the little pieces you don't think about, the UI and saving the game, and the what
builds break
exactly, and all these, why is it breaking, like it was working before, like all these little things that will drive you insane. But it teaches you a lot. It just teaches you a lot about how do you approach game development, and not that you need to have like a 20-point plan and have it all in Jira, and you know what I'm saying, like
right,
you don't need to do all that, but you got to at least approach it with some type of strategy.
You need goals, goals, like attainable goals. Like, where are you going with it? Is because if you stop with, I'm gonna make a game, then you could be working on that game the rest of your life theoretically, because you didn't set up anything for the other side of that.
Yeah,
because I'll agree. You know, you putting that definitive timeline on when we were going to release Amber was like the best thing that could have happened, because I was willing, because all the games I'd worked on up to that point, I had just worked on until I just burnt out on them, forgot about them, whatever. And so if you wouldn't have set that date, I would have never published any game to any degree. So I am grateful for that. But like you were saying, it also gave us the opportunity to experience the other side of things, the end of it. So many people build games for so long and then never know what it's like to actually publish it.
Yeah.
And so like if you publish something small, at least you get the experience of publishing something, you know.
Yeah.
And because to this day, there are things about Amber that I despise, the choices we made, but it's just like, I don't regret putting it out there, people that we shared it with, and even, you know, most of all, the experience of putting it out there.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think it's just one of those things where like our game got tighter because of that. Because, you know, first of all, the game is it's funny because you lose objectivity when you're creating a game, but like to see people enjoying it and people being like, yo, this is really cool, and people like really digging into it and like asking questions, and oh, it'd be cool if you, like when somebody says, oh, I wish this had this. Yeah. That's a good sign, because that tells you that there's something that they want to play it more, and they just wish it had this because it would draw them deeper into the game. It's like, okay, cool, you know? And I think that was like our first time making a game where we like we got actual feedback from people and got like actual like, okay, this was good, this was bad. And I think that that timeline and just publishing and going through that process, you know, it just teaches you like also perseverance. Like if anything, that's why props to every person who's ever made a game ever on any level. Right. You have a spirit that is unbreakable to some degree. Because, man, to finish out a game, to put it out there in a way that somebody can play it without ever seeing you, ever talking to you, is it's a monstrous feat. And so I had, you know, something we were talking about earlier was like game devs in general. And, you know, you were saying before, like, hey, you know, like, GMTK guy, Mark or whatever, is like, oh, you know, I'm working on this game in 30 days and I'm going to do it in my time. And I think what's interesting about being a game developer, particularly like for us who definitely desire to be in that world, but also like have to pay bills, have responsibilities, didn't come from, you know, means per se, and just kind of like it's not just easy to just step in to like making your own game without like making a huge sacrifice. There's something that like and we were talking about this earlier, like I feel like there's this thing that exists within game development as a whole, like what I like to call indie game dev privilege, you know, like where if you look at the person who is a successful indie dev, there's kind of a normal pattern to who they are. And there's a lot of things you can mention, but probably the biggest one is the ability to, one, solely focus on the development of that game. Yeah. Like, and maybe that's one because they're maybe able to, maybe they have no attachments, meaning they don't have a family, they don't have, you know, kids, stuff like that, like relational attachments. And also like there's a financial burden that I find an indie game dev rarely has. Like either it's because they have the ability to not work for long extended periods of time and still be able to eat and like have a house,
have internet, you know, have a computer that can, you know, run a game engine.
Yep.
That's all luxury stuff. So if you're not working and you have access to that stuff, you are blessed.
Yeah. And to have that and also like you said, like and then there's like a whole nother world of like, oh, like hearing stories of like, oh yeah, you know, me and a group of guys, we moved to San Francisco and we, you know, and it always sounds like they're slumming it out, right? Like 4 of us or 5 of us, we got a house in San Francisco and we all were working nonstop. That's all we did. You know, we didn't have social time. We didn't do anything but make this game. And I'm like, you know how much it costs to rent a house in San Francisco?
To live in San Francisco.
To live in San Francisco, to rent a box in San Francisco.
Like, isn't that one of the places with the highest homeless rate?
Yeah, it's ridiculous because of this. it's absolutely the opposite of affordable living, you know? And it's like, oh, you just got to go to these conventions and then show your game. And I'm like, how are you getting to that convention? How are you paying for a booth? How are you even like you said, you know, the biggest like difficulty for me getting into development at all is that I didn't have a phone. Like when I was making mobile games, I didn't have a phone that I could actually test or publish my games on. So all my games were made on my personal computer, which was already like struggling, and I could never really test them. So the way that I got a phone is that I did a Kickstarter just to get enough money to buy a low level phone that did enough for me to publish a game on.
Wow.
And I was blessed because I was able to stay at my parents' for a few months. You know, I was still working. That's the thing. I was working part-time for a good portion. And then, I was working a full-time. Then I went to part-time, had some money saved up, did that. But the thing is, I had to have somewhere to live. So if I didn't have my parents, you know, I have a privilege there.
Right.
You know, like good luck being a person who lives across the country or doesn't have family like that. Like you're not being an indie game dev. You know what I'm saying?
Not truly. Yeah.
You know?
Yeah. Because I know that there are indie game devs out there who do have a full-time job, have a significant other, and some of them even have kids. And, you know, like they're up till 3, 4 in the morning doing their thing. Hey, we're not talking about you guys. You guys are putting in the work, you know?
Yeah.
That's completely different. But if you're saying out here, you know, indie game dev life is hard, but you've been able to only work on your game for 2 years, you know, no source of income needed. That's not the real thing.
Yeah. You know, it's like, it's hard, you know, it's definitely like, you know, a lot of people to get into the industry, but just like any job, you get a job, it's kind of hard to leave that job because now, you know, there's all the attachments, you know, and, you know, that's why like games like the game we just mentioned, Stardew Valley, the guy made it over a course of years because he had to do it in the midst of things like, and from my understanding of the story, like you said, he made the game like 3 times to completion, you know, like it had to go back, you know, because he's like, I don't like this. I'm doing all the textures over. I'm doing all the dialogue over, you know, like it was crazy. And then there's like the next level, which is like, I'm not really an indie game dev, but I act like, remember when we went to GDC and the indie game dev awards? You remember that?
Yeah.
Remember who was winning all the games? The indie game dev, like you don't even have to remember the name of the game, but do you remember when they went on stage and accepted their awards? Who did they thank? Like who is their like?
Oh, like they had like their publishers and stuff.
Yeah, like these indie game devs, like the ones that we laud as indie game devs, they're not indies.
Yeah, they have
like,
the funding of AAA's, but they're like subsets of those. Like they're still affiliated with those enormous studios. But
yeah, they just have smaller teams. Like
right.
They're over here like thanking Mark Cerny and like people who are like Miyamoto. Like I just want to thank Miyamoto for his support. And I'm like, who?
Small contribution from Nintendo.
It wasn't Breath of the Wild on the indie game dev game, like there's some like random, like I don't know, there's just so many.
I remember what you're talking. Yeah, I think it was in the music genre or something. Yeah, but like, there was a game that did not belong there.
Yeah, and it's like there's 1 or 2 games that definitely were truly indie game devs. But even when you look into those stories more, you realize like it's really who you know.
Oh,
like you know,
yeah. And that's one of the discrepancies we've talked about, even with Steve one time, is that there's really no like balancing within the indie game space, because there is like when you get to the studio level, it's understood everybody has a studio of some sort. But in the indie game, it starts off like the highest is a small studio and the lowest is one guy working by himself for 10 years, and they have to compete in the same arena. Yeah. It's completely unbalanced.
Yeah. Like, it just feels like like, yeah, like why, it's going back to like, I'm playing in the high school league. You're playing in the NFL. Like, not necessarily like skill level, but it's like resources. Even
Yeah.
like, I can't get in front of as many eyes, but we're competing for the same quote unquote dollars on Steam or Itch. Like it blows my mind when I see like these smaller like game publishing platforms, and I see a game that I'm like, that is nowhere near. Like, this should be not here. This isn't fair. This just drowns out everybody,
Right.
And
yeah, it's a shark.
Yeah, and it's hard because, like you said, it's like what defines an indie? Because there's like because like the breadth of indie is so wide. It's like an indie game could be something like could end up being like a game like like I'm blanking on the name of it, but it could be a really popular game with gosh, I can't remember anything right now. But let's say some game like
what do you do in the game? I might be able to help you out. Explain it to me.
Like the dude who made he made the game. Oh my goodness, yeah! I'm so sorry to everybody.
You're starting off with the dude. Tell me about the game.
I literally can't think of the game. Like it was a platformer back in the day. It's one of the first original platformer. Indie game. Bubsy, thank you, 3D. Indie games was like on Xbox Live. It was
a platforming game,
and it was like, and you could like change the speed. You could go back in the past, and like it was a platformer with these weird.
Oh, Braid.
Braid. The dude who made Braid has made another game, which I can't remember, but that game is like he's got a support and all this stuff, like it, but it's considered indie. But this is not like on the same level of any person who's just an average indie, like it's like the AAA indie, right? And then there's the game. So this game is quality, is well done, been, play tested, all this stuff. And then on the same realm of indie is you got some guy who is just making clones of other games, and it's just trash. So it's like there's no quality control. There's no quality control or content control in the world of indie. So it's like, what does indie even mean? It's like,
right. Because it's short for independent, but there's nothing independent about they have armies behind them. There's nothing independent about them.
Yeah. Yeah, like if you see a commercial for an indie game, it's not an indie game. Like,
because it wouldn't have a commercial.
Like, nah, like it would be some random dude standing outside of the convention center at GDC handing out flyers, like when he's not supposed to be there.
Oh, yeah. I still got a disc. I don't think I ever even opened it. It's probably a collectible now. Mm-hmm. It was what? Like a homeless battle royale, something like that.
I'm sorry. Make sure if you ever put that on a computer, make sure you disconnect from the internet. You do everything, because that thing about to make you homeless. He's like, oh, you want to play a homeless battle royale? Let me show you how it's done. Go straight to the streets. You finna be fighting for your survival, man. A homeless battle royale. That's just that's an indie game right there. Because don't nobody want it, and ain't nobody finna play that.
He gave it to me for free.
Of course he did.
On a disc. Like, he put in the money.
Yeah.
I put it in my old PC just in case it did something wild. But I don't think the game would run. I forgot.
Yeah, it's probably a virus, son. You better
So it did run.
It did run. It's like, man, this game isn't working. Like, yeah, it is working. It's doing exactly. That's how people be hacking people's computers. But
that's what I get for trusting that disc.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like it's. I mean, I don't know how the industry goes forward, because like, what's next? Like,
yeah,
like,
I mean, I can hear it now. A lot of people are just saying, get better. Quit complaining. Get out there and find the resources and stuff. The way that other industries and businesses handle whenever this type of thing happens, rather than going to the root of it and like understanding that the community itself has been damaged. Like the reason why, indie games needs to be protected is because of like what it allows. Like there's so much freedom in true indie games, and there's so many new experiences that can only be made on an indie level because, you're not going to get funding for something that hasn't been proven. Mm-hmm. But just because it hasn't been proven doesn't mean that it's not quote unquote fun, right?
Exactly. Or it doesn't connect to some audience, right? Like
exactly,
it doesn't have to sell 100,000 units to be profitable, right? Or successful or meaningful. Right. There can be somebody. I remember I made I guess maybe I've made 4 games before we started working together. I made this game called Kowloon, Clean House Kowloon.
And I remember that one, yeah.
And it was a card game. I don't even think you could play it anymore because Flash is pretty much dead.
Oh,
but like
R.I.P.
R.I.P. But I released this game on a Flash site called Congregate, and I'm pretty sure this was my first game that I ever released, and it was just a card game, and like it was like a word game, like it's one of those games that I want to go back and remaster. Hilarious. I'm gonna do about as good as the GTA trilogy remaster.
Oh my god!
But essentially, it was an okay game at best. Like okay to bad, bad to okay. And I mean, you can find some enjoyment. And the most interesting thing was I made this game. I added points and I added a leaderboard. Yes, I added a leaderboard.
Hey, you gotta have a leaderboard. I don't even know why you mentioned that. It's not a game if it doesn't have one.
At least on Flash sites like this, like on Congregate, like leaderboards were like important. It was like you had to have them because it was
that was before like true multiplayer and stuff.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it was before like you couldn't, especially in a Flash game. Like
yeah.
I guess you could do multiplayer in a Flash game nowadays, but like that's the only way you interacted with other people in the community. And there was like daily leaderboards, weekly, all time. Mm-hmm. And so I had different leaderboards for like points, for score, stuff like that. So anyway, I didn't get a ton of plays, maybe like a few hundred, who knows.
Nice.
I'd have to go back, maybe less than it. But I had some people review it. Some people were like, oh, this is really cool. I like the music, blah, blah, blah. The game looks pretty bad. Like, one dude said, this is thinly veiled Christian propaganda. But the game, but like the name of my studio was called Jesus is Lord Games. Like, I'm like, I don't know how I could thinly veil this. like this is the name of my studio. And like, I start out with like a scripture, like, I don't know.
You were being subtle.
I guess I was being too subtle.
Wait a minute.
Like, how dare you?
I read it as Jesus the first time.
Yeah, he was very, very much offended. I was like, okay, well, I appreciate you being offended because that means that I had an impact. So anyway, I make the game. Not many people are playing. A few people playing it, but one person play. Like I saw their all-time score was ridiculous.
Loyal.
It was like they played hundreds of hours.
Oh my gosh!
And I was like, what in the world? So for one person in this world, on this planet, whoever you are out there, who played Clean House Kowloon, there's no way I'll ever know who you are.
Never.
Maybe I could find your username on the site because it was there. But I made that game for you.
You did. You brightened their world.
Yeah, like for them, they really found some joy in it. And
that's crazy.
I made no money off the game. I didn't do it. But to me, that, like, I think in many ways that has encouraged me to keep making games because there is a place. Somebody can enjoy your game if you make it with, if you go all the way through and you really put it out there. And so, like, to me, that's the indie space. Like,
yeah.
But it feels almost like, I don't know where, like, the fact that people played my game was super cool. But like nowadays, I don't even think there's a space that I could make that game again and anybody would ever see it or be able to interact with. You know what I'm saying?
It's so saturated out there. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm surprised that someone didn't come up with a way to save, at least a public way, to save Flash games. Like, the internet just kind of let them die. I'm very surprised by that. Like, maybe there was a way to download them and there's some tool, but it, like, at least to me, it wasn't common knowledge, because that's, 20 plus years archived games on these different sites that you just can't interact with anymore.
Yeah, I assume, like, I can't imagine that this giant site like Congregate, where all of their portfolio was pretty much Flash games for a very long time, like they didn't do something. But yeah, like to think all that's lost to time is tough.
I mean, maybe it's not, but I haven't checked. But like Flash Player did got the X.
It's definitely not supported anymore. So if you want to get hacked, that's number one way for sure.
Download the update.
Yeah, like you're done. Like it's like, oh, you're gone. Yeah. I mean, I feel like that's where like I assume it exists. As we were talking about like journalism and GMTK, like we were talking about like journalism earlier in general in the gaming industry, and I don't know, maybe I'm not aware of it, but I wonder if is there an outlet, journalism outlet that is purely indie game focused, but not like just bend it like I almost said bend it like Bennett Foddy. What's that stupid game? What's the game? Bennett Foddy game? You know what I'm talking about.
He's made a couple of them, but the last one was Getting Over It.
Getting Over It.
That dude's good.
Like is there a place that reviews really small indie games? And what is the place for game journalism? Like, it kind of goes back to this idea of like, these people don't know how to play games, but they evaluate games, right?
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. What do you think about game journalism in general?
So, unfortunately, it seems like it's something that's been hijacked by the industry. Most, if not all, the game journalists that I'm aware of cover new games, popular games, and I say new as in like AAA new, with the marketing budget sent them a code or just came out, so it's on everybody's mind type of games. Not, games that, are new in time alone, like the smaller indie games. To my knowledge, I don't know of anywhere that's just like, trying to find them. Because one thing I try to understand is, games like Among Us, like that was a small indie game, relatively. It came out in 2018, and then all of a sudden in 2020 it was popular.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know if it was already popular on its platform it was on, or like how that happened, but it leads me to believe that somebody somewhere out there is looking at these indie games with no marketing budget and putting them in front of people. But, what that process is, where it's happening, and which ones make the cut it seems to all be random or lucky, or I don't know.
Yeah. And actually, now that you talk about Among Us, it's funny because I actually think the way that Among Us became popular was purely because of a Twitch streamer or a YouTuber. Not Rice Gum. Man, I can't remember the guy's name, but he's a Twitch streamer, and all he did was play Among Us. And before it was cool, but he basically started the Among Us craze. Like,
wow.
It wasn't through marketing. It was literally a Twitch streamer, a YouTuber. And to think that like the only way that you can get popular is through some guy or girl randomly playing your game, I guess
someone who already has a following to some degree.
And then that spreads it and it becomes viral, You know, that's how a lot of games have. You know, I was just one of the GDC talks. Somebody was saying like, yeah, now as a publisher, it's core. Like you need to go and approach these streamers and pay them money to play your game.
Wow.
You know, so like now that people like before it was like, oh, it just happened. Like this guy played the game and it made it really popular. Now it's like, yeah, like the people with money now see this and they're like, oh,
right.
You know, like,
and it brings it to the next level.
Mm-hmm. It's like, how do you possibly compete with that? Like, how do you even get slightly noticed?
Yeah.
You know, like,
how do you, especially because you're such a drop in the bucket. Like, even though Flash is no longer a thing, you know, Unity has more than filled that slot. Game Maker or RPG Maker, you know, what was it? It was the program you used to use. Another 2D game maker.
Construct?
Construct, yeah. All these, you know, they're all supported. I'm pretty sure all of them are supported by itch, to where you could publish your game, and it's like hundreds, if not thousands, of games are published every day just there. But I remember seeing a statistic that on Steam, there are like hundreds, if not thousands, of games posted every day.
So crazy. It's so crazy.
And so it's like, first off, how do you get noticed? And then how do you even demand someone's time to play your game if they notice it? Like you have a nice cover image or anything. Like they might, you know, like just getting in the door.
I just feel like there's no... I feel like the answer is just almost pure luck. Like it doesn't feel like there's... Like it's either you have the money to put your game in front of people, or your game is just going to die a silent death, or get lucky, you know, and get picked up. And I feel like that's the problem, right? Like if you can only like, and you know what, maybe this is how all industries work. If you really think about it, I think we're both fans of Shark Tank.
Oh yeah.
Know? And there's definitely hard work, and there's definitely people who are out there, out 100%. In these streets. But it's like there's a point where it's like you engage with the right person at the right time in the right space. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
And then you have an opportunity that you possibly couldn't get. And I feel like, and also money. Like how many times has somebody on Shark Tank said, "I've put in $700,000.
Asked all my uncles and aunts
and cousins." I'm like, who your uncles and aunts and cousins? I need to holler.
I sold my dog.
My dog sold his kids. You know, like it's hard to even imagine how you can get to a place, you know.
And then you hear about that. You hear that story, how much money they invested into it. And then none of the sharks invest. It's like, like this is something someone believed in enough to spend this much time, more than $500,000 into. But that in and of itself isn't even enough of a guarantee that it's going to be successful. So it's like, if you don't even have that, you know, like, and not to sound, you know, super depressing or anything, but it's just like that's the reality of it. Is sometimes, you know, it's like, how do you even expect for your thing you put out there with no marketing to even really exist as far as the internet's concerned?
Yeah, like you have to hope that you can somehow. I mean, it is blind hope. You know what I'm saying? Like that somehow, you're going to be the person who rises above all of the challenges, you know. Yeah. You know, and it's like, how, like, you don't want to set your your company or your dreams or your life off of literally a what do you call it? Like a card draw from a pile, you know?
It's a chance.
You know, it's like there's no, I don't know. It just feels like everything's a gamble, of course. But like level, but at a point, like you, Like, how do you, as a person who actually has a really good idea, who's actually really talented, who actually knows what they're doing, has something to offer, how do you get out there and get in front of the right people without luck or a lot of money?
Yeah. I wish there was a way to know how many Stardew Valleys are out there, how many Minecrafts, like how many indie games that somebody, spent a lifetime working on and brought it to a level of polish and put it out there, put their financial state in jeopardy, knowing that it's just as good. And everybody else would agree if we knew it existed. Like, how many of those games are actually just out there in the ether? I wonder.
How many games that are worthwhile and that have never been discovered, you mean?
Yeah.
Yo, that's terrifying.
Because I don't know of big publishers, like they'll start developing a game, right? They have all the money and resources. They'll put a demo out, at least when in the age of demos, and everybody will love the demo, and then they'll cancel the game.
Yeah. Yeah.
And those are just the ones we know about that are good.
Yeah, because it's how many games have been that you hear about like years and years later that like never.
Yeah.
That just never somehow, what do you call it? Like moved its way up the weird ladder.
Yeah.
That you find out like, oh yeah, they had this random game in development 15 years ago. It just never got released.
Cancel.
Yeah, I mean, it's terrifying because, like, if you go to, like you said about Steam, like, man, like, imagine putting, and this is something that we even have to consider as people who truly, genuinely desire to be, like, in the creative field, creating creative content that matters, that impacts people. It's like making this game, putting years and years of your life into it, even putting maybe a marketing budget and having a publisher, all this stuff. It gets released on Steam alongside 99 other games, 50 of them being clone games, another 48 of them being like games that are like okay or seem cool, puzzle platformers.
Right. And a handful that are eerily similar to yours somehow.
Yeah, somehow. And then one AAA game, like an Arkham Asylum, drop on the same day as yours. Like, your game is lost. And you spent 2, 3, who knows how long, Like, it's
years
terrifying.
and money. And
like, I don't know. I mean, it feels like one of those things where in life, everything somewhat is a gamble, but like especially in game dev and stuff like that, like going back to like our original discussion, it's like, number one, this is a hard craft to be in, and
super competitive,
and to hear that somebody who's been speaking as an authority doesn't know anything about it, and then like realizing like behind all that, like you speak very highly on what makes a good game a game or a bad game, but like, does it matter if your game is good? Like,
right.
Like
I
mean,
ultimately depends on what your goals are.
And just kind of going back to GMTK, like, and I just want to put this out there, like, it was kind of disappointing, like, even trying to put your hard effort into a game jam when it felt like some people were getting treatment,
special attention,
special treatment. Like, kind of knew something that you didn't know?
Yo, legitimately, one of the games was on the homepage of Itch.
Yes.
During the voting process of the game jam.
What? How does that even make sense? How does a game? How is that fair to the person who thinks this is an opportunity for them to get some exposure when a game comes in already with exposure? At a game jam where you're supposed to create a new game from scratch.
Exactly.
Like, not that I want to say the indie game industry is corrupt, but I feel like there is some level of there's an in club. You know what I'm saying?
I mean, anything worth being a part of has its own level of politics inside of it. Unfortunately.
Yeah.
And so But then you got to decide, if that's the game you want to play. Because I think one of the positive things to come out of your story with your game is another thing that you can also garner from like Shark Tank, when maybe you put a lot of effort, time into something and other people don't see the value, like the people who you want to value it don't see the value. And even, in endeavors like this with the podcast, YouTube, it's really about reaching those who it does matter to, finding value in those, or finding those who will find value in it, versus trying to make something that's valuable to everybody.
Yeah. Yeah. It's like there's something more. Like at the end of the day, if you're a game developer and somebody who really cares about this stuff, like you genuinely, you put your whole heart and soul into this. And and even if, nobody ever plays your game, if nobody ever sees your game, like you still really want it to be out there and you want hopefully somebody to experience it and engage with it. And so I guess it's like any creative endeavor, right? Like art or dancing or, like, and I hope in many ways for those who may be interested in game development and are listening today is that, like, number one, like, don't worry about the quote unquote experts, because we were tricked. And we've been at it.
Bamboozled.
And we've been to GDC and we've really like dug into this, and it was hard to tell when somebody wasn't really about that life.
Right.
But at the end of the day, like, it doesn't matter, because who's an authority in this, Like, what does that really mean,
Yeah, like if you want to make a game, you enjoy making a game, you're enjoying the process of making a game, then even in that, to that token, finishing the game shouldn't even be like, I encourage anybody who is starting a game to just see it through, but you really got to, do it based on what your intentions are. Like if you want it to be a learning experience, let it be that,
Yeah.
Like enjoy the process sometimes, because maybe down the line you'll make another game and you'll publish that one. Because what comes to my mind is like a lot of times, especially in the age of social media, if you do anything creative, there's this compelling just unction to share it. But then when you want to share something, you have this certain level of polish in your mind most of the time. And I think about like, and this is a super old reference, but like artists who died, I guess hundreds of years ago now, like Van Gogh, like they'd find like his sketches and stuff he'd never show anybody, like of him practicing and getting better at his craft, like the stuff he'd never share. And it wasn't necessarily meant to be shared, but it's just like, even somebody who's great, they're creating stuff that maybe nobody will ever see. They're creating stuff that maybe will never get published. They're creating stuff that maybe it will get published, but nobody will ever see it, But then I think it goes back to a conversation we've had before about like overnight successes and stuff, and the weird idea behind that, how every indie game that's ever come out and was successful is the first one they ever made, overnight, and it's just like kind of demystifying that whole idea too. It's just get out there and do it sometimes,
For real. And it's hard because at the end of the day, like, you got to know, like you said, like, it has to be something for you. Of course, like, yes, even if it's for you and it's for financial gain, amen. If that's your goal, you should approach it with that,
Right.
mindset, and spend more time thinking about, how do I make this game monetizable and a way to support my family? And, because, if you ask any person who's done any artistic endeavor, what's the difference in skill between a starving artist and $1 million artist? Sometimes the starving artist is better.
Right. Yeah.
You know,
it's true.
And you're like, how could, like, or musicians, man, like, how many times
Oh my
is like,
gosh.
you're like, how is this man or woman a star when I've seen a girl at my local church or
Right.
at the Starbucks on a Tuesday singing, and you're like, yo, like, this girl is crazy good. It's
Right.
like you have to be honest, you know, like, do I want to be a part of this game? Like, do I need to, you know, approach it? And yeah, like, if it's like me and Kyle, who knows what our goal is going to be at the end of the day? You know, I think and I guess I'll open this to you and ask you, you know, as we kind of wrap up this episode, like Kyle, like, and I share first, like, why do you do this? You know, why do you make games? And for me, I make games because it's truly one of the most authentic ways that I can express myself.
Mm.
And number one, being a lover of games. I mean, I have all these Game Informer magazines, and I listen to GDC talks, and I like really think about this stuff outside of just making games. Like, to me, this is like truly an extension of myself. And yes, I'd love to be a game developer full time. Yes, I'd love to make games full time. But to me, that's not necessarily the end goal. The end goal is to make something meaningful and impactful to somebody, and to get it in front of people who want to see it, you know, and not even necessarily to make money, but to have an impact. Like, I mean, how many kids have played Minecraft and it really was something that they needed at that time in their life? Just an escape, you know, maybe the pressures at school or at home, or how to connect with their friends. Like, it's more than just a game for them. And, and I know that's how a lot of games have been for me. It's more than a game for me. Like, I don't talk about it as like, yeah, I got the highest score and blah, blah, blah. It's like, no, like, this game, like, literally, you know, Age of Empires and Dynasty Warriors, they have they're an integral part of my story and my life. Even though those games are completely different. Dynasty Warriors is lightweight. A lot of people would say it was trash to them. To me, it was meaningful, and I just want to make something meaningful. And I think games is one of the mediums, and you know, any other creative thing is another one. But that's kind of why I make games, because I want them to matter to somebody and make an impact. So yeah, what about you, Kyle?
That's awesome, man. Yeah, I agree on a lot of those fronts. But I guess for me, any creative endeavor, you know, all kind of stems from the same place. And I'm not going to say his name in case I misquote him, but there's a psychologist, I guess, is that the right one? Who he mentioned this idea of like suffering from being a creative. Like a lot of people say that they're creative, but you know, to truly be one isn't necessarily that desirable because you can't turn it off. And it's like this innate desire to, and it's not just to necessarily like make something all the time. It's just like you can't shut your brain off. And so making something is like the only form of release as far as, you know, it not being so stressed and amped up, you know, like being contained somewhere where you can't do anything is like the absolutely worst. And I would say that I'm kind of, you know, not necessarily high on that spectrum, but I feel like I fall in that to where I always feel like I need to be doing something with my hands. Like I need to be making something. I need to be working on something because my mind, it just doesn't stop. And it doesn't mean I have like a bunch of good ideas or anything like that. Everything I make is even stuff that I even necessarily like all the time. But it's like being creative to me is when I feel the most alive. And so whether it be playing music or drawing or game development, you know, something that is that creative outlet, like, and it's one thing I'm trying to get past because eventually I'd like for people to see the stuff we make, you know, and like you said, you know, monetize it and it be a career. But it's like a lot of times it's just, I just make stuff because I just enjoy making stuff, you know, and games have been no different for me necessarily. And so I might have a biased opinion when it comes to like just making stuff. So not to take away what I said earlier about just kind of making stuff. I still think that's a good idea, but that might be why I have the inclination to do that, is because that's just where my heart lies, is just in creating things. I hardly care about the medium, and I hardly care about opportune times. You know? Like if we can just make something, I'm down.
Yeah, something meaningful. I think you said something that I've been. It's hard. You kind of said something I've struggled trying to express to others for a long time. Is that I feel the most alive when I create. Like for that period of time where like we were both pretty busy and we weren't making any games, like those were like, not that life was like super hard or anything, but I definitely felt like those were just like years and days where I was just like just living. Life was good.
What am I doing?
Yeah, like work. It was just work every day, and and I was thankful for all the relationships I had and everything like that. But there was always a piece of me missing. Like I need to create something. So even when I wasn't creating games, I was finding another capacity. So that's when I picked up the cajon, and I was playing at my church. And that was remember when we had a jam session at Guitar Center, like it was always it's always looking for an outlet, right? That creativity.
Yeah.
And I really do feel like a lot of times when I'm creating is when I feel the closest to like God in a weird way. Like it's when I feel like you got to think like God created man. And, for those who are religious or not, like just speaking from my own personal beliefs, like if God created man and he was like happy and all this stuff, like maybe there's a piece of us who enjoys to create because like that's just a part of what man is. And I don't know, it's always resonated with me. And even from when I was a kid, I had to create something. I was learning to draw, or I was learning to break dance, or it had to be some creative outlet. I go crazy when I feel like I'm not making something.
Right. I have to really be careful with it because I can get like almost depressed because I just get into a funk because it's like, man, what am I doing with my life if I'm not making anything? It's like sometimes where my mind goes, and it's like it's a crazy kind of thing, And so
it's definitely a balance, and I think that's the curse of creativity, Like how many ideas do we have that we know will never be made, but like they still we yearn for them to be created. And like it's like, man, I gotta create this idea. Me and Kyle have an idea. We can't tell y'all about it because it's too good of an idea. But that is literally like, I think if me and Kyle were really real, if there's one game that we feel that we have to make before our life is over, it's this game. Yeah. And we already have it planned out. I still have the documents. We both came to a conclusion that we weren't at a place where we can make it the way that we want to, right? And so we had to step away,
It's intended to be, we think it's going to be great, but even if it's not, it's intended to be our magnum opus.
Really?
So
yes.
Anything we do in the interim has to be just that, If it's successful too, that's not a bad thing.
Awesome.
But yeah,
I feel like everything that we do today, all the games we make, all the creative things, is all like just a train heading in that direction to that train stop. Like we're trying to get the experience we need, the skills we need to be able to make this game. And I do believe that this game could be successful. If anything, like I think it could have an impact, a meaningful impact on people who are conscientious, real people who love gaming but are in a different place in their life.
It's meant to tick specific boxes. So,
and
I would go as far to say that everything that we've made together, all these games, have had that same energy behind it. As far as like we haven't done anything haphazardly.
True.
Like it's always with the intent to be respectful of whoever's time is invested into whatever we make.
And I think one thing that I would say about the games we make, and we're working on some games now, it's like we are always trying to invoke a feeling to our games. You know, like the realest thing is like we start making our game mechanic, and then, you know, me, I'm crazy, so I always like to put music and like some of that stuff in. And like once we put the music and get like certain pieces together, it starts to feel like a thing.
Mm-hmm.
And that's when it's like, oh, we're heading somewhere, you know? Like, you know, there's a game we made at a game jam that I still like build it like human, where I'm like, we got to make this game, you know? Like,
yeah,
it has a feeling that I think would really resonate with a lot of people. This might not be the time to make it, but I think we can make it. So,
and to a degree, you know, we got the idea out there. We built, for all intents and purposes, a prototype.
Yeah,
you know, and it's released. People could play it now, and so just want to reiterate one of the things we said earlier. You know, like, release your game. Don't get caught up in the polish, especially if it's your first attempt. You know, if your goal is to make a game and see it through, be easy on yourself, right? Yeah, be careful of the scope creep.
And you know, it's tough, you know, for anybody who's listened this far into the podcast. You know, we started off kind of on like a pretty harsh note, but like a very real, like talking seriously about like a particular, you know, creator, and, you know, nothing against their journey, but it's kind of like, even to them, to the GMTK guy, Mark or whatever, like, yeah, make the game you want to make, but understand that, like, for us as game developers, like, we take this really seriously, and it kind of feels hurtful to know that, like, there's somebody, not to say that it was your goal to masquerade or anything like that, but it kind of felt like that to us. And to see that, like, wow, like, somebody we looked up to was really just kind of playing us a little bit, you know, it kind of hurts, especially from where we're coming from as game developers and people who care about this craft, you know. So
exactly, yeah.
So, so before we wrap up, guess what, Kyle? I managed to find the original page for my game on Congregate. I was just
you found it.
Yeah, it was. I actually had to log into my old developer account because I couldn't find it in the search because I think they delisted it. But
I want you to say the URL character by character on the podcast.
Good luck. Good luck with that. All I can say is it's on Congregate. It's made by Jill Games, and it's called Clean House Kowloon. You can't really play it because you have to get like a weird thing to enable Flash Player in your browser. And I don't know what, I'm not messing with that.
Download it.
Yeah, I don't know. I got to figure that out. I'm going to do that after here. But it's funny. All the comments are gone. So sadly, you know, you can't see the comments that people were saying. But
also, nobody can verify if anything you said was true. How convenient.
But what does still exist is my high scores list. And I'm looking through and I see like, yeah, some people played it. Like basically it was a word game. And like the average person maybe found like maybe 10 to 50 words. There's some people who found, you know, hundreds of words, you know, and you have to understand in each game, there's maybe like 5 words to find.
Oh, wow.
So you'd have to play it.
It takes a while to get that many.
Yeah, quite a bit, you know. And it looks like one person reached the maximum level in the game. Only one person, that the guy I was talking about. Because it's level 25. And to get to 25, you have to play through quite a bit of content. Like, I didn't get to level 25. So, you know, shout out to Ergodyne. That's the name of his username, for making it to level 25. So anyway, nice. Yeah, you know, hey, you know, shout out to our boy Steve. You know, you're missed. But hopefully when he listens to this podcast, he can learn him a thing about game development.
Learn something.
Learn you a thing, boy. But as always, you know, thank you, Kyle, for your time. And thank you.
Always a pleasure, man.
Yeah, man, it was a good discussion. A lot of things got off our chest today. And yeah, thank you everybody for listening. You know, to game devs, to just normal people. You know, we really appreciate it. Please, you know, share these, you know, what we're doing with other people. You know, we just want more people to know about it and join our discussion. Of course, leave comments. Feel free to reach out to us. We hope to have one of these days Twitter. We were just talking about it, so then you can really communicate with us in real time. Shout out to all the people in the Super Agile Bros Nation. We appreciate y'all. We love y'all, and thank you for listening. And as always, until next time, peace.